Today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh wrote the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asking him to intervene in Alberta because of the COVID-19 crisis. He asked us for some specific things like more money for nurses, a robust vaccine passport, and also support for contact tracing, testing, and reporting in schools. Well, the problem is this is provincial jurisdiction. So I wanted to talk to Duane Bratt, who's a political science professor at Mount Royal University, about what the federal government can do and what it can't do. Welcome to the interview, Duane.
Hey, Markham, good to speak with you again.
Well, look, let me rephrase or say it again. What can the federal government do in this context and what can't it do?
It can do all sorts of stuff once the provincial government requests their help. So they can provide money, they can provide vaccines, they can provide military assistance. And in fact, they've done all three of those, but only at the request of the provincial government. And it's notable that the request for help, which came from Rick McIver the day after the federal election. So they waited until the election was over. And apparently Rick McIver, who's been a cabinet minister for a lot of years in multiple governments, was unaware that there's still a minister during an election. He had no idea who to send the letter to, as opposed to telling the truth, which is they were waiting till the federal election is over. And so there are ways that the federal government can intervene into provincial jurisdiction, most notably with spending, what we call the federal spending power. But in this circumstance, they have to wait for a request from the provincial government, and they can't just unilaterally go in there. And either Jagmeet Singh is aware of this and not caring, or he doesn't know this. But I think it's quite apparent. You're not going to find a constitutional scholar that says that the federal government can simply intervene because it's a crisis.
Now, I've had a number of people ask me on social media, what more can the federal government do? Can the government, the feds, intervene directly in some way or fashion? But the Constitution basically says that in areas of provincial jurisdiction, as you said, that the province has to ask Ottawa, and there literally is nothing else they can do.
Absolutely. We have an Emergencies Act, and people say, well, they can use the Emergencies Act. But if you read the Emergencies Act, it has to come from a request from a provincial government. Likewise, and the Emergencies Act was an update of the old War Measures Act. And you may recall the infamous time back in the early 1970s where Pierre Trudeau imposed the War Measures Act, sent armed troops into Montreal. What is often forgotten is that was only at the request of the Quebec Premier, Robert Bourassa. Trudeau did not have the ability unilaterally doing that. And this is something that the Canadians get confused about the Constitution, that it was never designed that there was a hierarchy of governments, with the federal government being above the provincial government. It's a division between two. And that is the beauty of the Canadian Federation. And so we've given some powers to the federal government, some powers to the provincial government, some that are shared, some that are disputed, but healthcare is pretty explicit that it is in provincial jurisdiction. So I don't think we want a situation where the federal government can just go in and remove, for example, a provincial government because people don't think they're doing a good job.
Well, let's flip this question on its head. What can municipal governments do? I mean, they are not in the Constitution. They're creatures of the province, as it were. And so what can they do?
So the municipalities have been doing various things. So there is a vaccine mandate in the city of Calgary. There was a mask mandate that predated what the provincial government did. And right now they have the jurisdiction to do that, but there would be nothing legally preventing the provincial government from simply telling the municipality that they can't do that. So the province has that ability. It's chosen not to do that for very good reasons. There's always been tensions between the city of Calgary, the city of Edmonton, the provincial government, but we have seen situations in the past where smaller municipal governments have simply been replaced by the provincial government. So they do have some steps, but that's not what people are advocating, because people notice that it's the inaction of the provincial government, not the inaction of municipalities, that is the problem. And you've got a whole bunch of Albertans so frustrated with the situation, so angry with the situation, and they're looking for some way that somebody responsible can respond to COVID, as opposed to waiting for a year and a half before the next election. And so I've been fielding all sorts of calls from good intentioned people saying, well, can the Fed step in? And as we've just said, no, they can't. Well, what about the lieutenant governor? Can she simply fire the Kenney government, bring in a new government? Or can she simply say, that's it, we're calling an election? And I said, no, as much as it appears that they have a lot of power, most of that's simply symbolism. LGs and governor generals haven't had that power since the early 19th century, and nor would we want one. Ultimately, it is going to be about the voters to determine that. Now, it's possible, and there were rumblings last week, that there could have been a vote of non-confidence in the legislature against Kenney. If that happens, now there is a role. She could either say, well, is there another government that has the confidence that doesn't involve Jason Kenney? Maybe there is. Or she may say, okay, it's been 2.5 years, let's have an election. In that circumstance, she would have some power. But without a non-confidence vote, there's not a whole lot that she can do, nor do I think we want an appointed representative to just get rid of an elected provincial government because we don't like what they're doing.
So the bottom line here, Duane, if I understand this correctly, is that basically this all comes back to the provincial government. The feds can do a little bit, the municipalities can do a little bit, but at the end of the day, if the provincial government is not going to act responsibly, isn't going to manage the pandemic responsibly, it's the ballot box is the only solution.
With one little caveat, and that is there is a group of people that could put pressure on the provincial government, and that's the United Conservative Party caucus. And they have chosen not to go down that route. There was a special caucus meeting last week. The caucus is incredibly divided. There's a number of MLAs that believe the government has acted too strongly by bringing vaccine passports, for example, when they promised that they wouldn't. Then there's another group that's also upset with the government because they feel that it's waited weeks too long before they can act. Both of those groups agree that they don't want Jason Kenney to be premier anymore. The problem is they have no idea what to do next. They have no idea who to replace him with. Do they replace him with someone who would remove all of the restrictions that are in place right now over COVID? Or would they replace him with someone who would strengthen that? And those two groups can't agree. And so Jason Kenney will remain until at least April.
Well, Duane, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights on this.
Okay, you're welcome, Markham.